Okay, we all know what the problem is. The European Union policy initiatives are a crime against humanity. Whether it's deliberate or not, it is their policies that are causing the problems. And the conditions will not improve unless they reverse these policies, and I don't see these policies reversing. Okay, so what I say here is a blind man can see the problem. It's unemployment, wealth destruction, business destruction, social destruction. It's the destruction of civilization itself. This is the key right here, and what I'm going to do is stop here so that when you come here, you're going to leave completely understanding and feeling what the real problem is. The entire world believes the deficits are too large, and they're doing everything they can to bring the deficits down. ME-MMT knows the problem is the deficit is too small. Unemployment is always and only the evidence that deficits are too small. Now, in Greece, they went to an extreme for deficit reduction. They confiscated 80% of the bondholders' money. They reduced the Greek debt by 100 billion euro. They allowed them to default on their bonds. The deficit collapsed, the debt collapsed by 100 billion euro. And what happened to the Greek economy? Did it get better? No. The economy got worse and unemployment went up. They've got it wrong. Deficit reduction makes it worse. Austerity makes it worse. And it's not just me. If you were to talk to any 100 economists who are paid to be right, there are economists who spread propaganda. I'm not talking about those. But the economists who make their living by making forecasts that have to be right, those economists. And you ask them what happens when you make the deficit smaller. Ask them what happens when you have austerity. And every one of them will tell you it makes the economy worse. They revise their numbers down, except the unemployment number. They revise that up. They all agree. You ask the same economists who are paid to be right, what would happen if you did any combination of raising spending and cutting taxes? That's the opposite of austerity. More public spending, lower taxes. Ask these economists what happens. And they all agree. The economy gets better. Output goes up, employment goes up, and unemployment goes down. They all agree. What is so hard about this? How can anyone say they don't understand this? How can these people have it backwards? But clearly they do. You've been living it for 5 years now. I've come over here to get the word out on this as to what's going on, what the problem is, and what the answer is. Okay, now I'm going to give you a little model here so you can understand this and explain it to other people, and so you can feel what's going on here. Now, unemployment is people looking for work because they need the money. They want to get paid. I would hire thousands of people if I didn't have to pay them, and so would everybody else. There's plenty of work to be done. It's just payment that's the problem. Now, this is my business card. I'm the only one who issues these. But would any of you here go to work for me if all I did was pay you with these cards? Of course not. What are you going to do with it, right? Try to sell it on eBay. Good luck. I tried. Doesn't work. Okay, so none of you are unemployed where you want a job that pays in my business cards. No one feels any pressure where you have to have one of these, right? No one's worried about not being able to get one. But now I'm going to tell you one more thing, and this is just pretend. There's only one door to get out of this room, and there's a man there with a gun, and he works for me. And you can't get out of here without one of these. Do you feel the pressure now? Okay. You are now all unemployed for my business cards. You're now wondering how you're going to get out of this room, what you have to do to get these things. Now if I tell you there's a job where you have to help clean the floor and take care of the room, and I'm going to pay you a business card, you're interested. Now, you know this system works. And this is exactly what the British did when they monetized Africa. They went into Ghana and they wanted to grow coffee. And there were people living in Ghana at the time. This was 200 years ago, 250 years ago. But none of them wanted to work on the coffee plantation. They were taking care of their families and hunting and farming, and there was no unemployment. They were not looking for paid work. Everybody had a job. The grandmother helped take care of the children while the mother was out collecting berries or whatever they were doing. There was always work to be done. So what did the British do? They came up with a very clever thing. They came up with the new money. I'm going to use the word the crown. They called it the crown. And they told everyone there that there was something called a hut tax. They imposed a hut tax. if you don't pay 10 crown a month in tax, we're going to burn down your hut. And you know how those people felt when that happened, the same way you felt when you knew you needed these to get out the door, right? Only that was for real. Now they could offer jobs. Now everyone was unemployed. They all were looking for jobs to earn crown. Now, does everybody follow this so far? Okay. I've learned to keep it very simple because I've had to explain it to central bankers. And you have... It's true, I had a conference for central bank, and I've done this many times, at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, in 1996. And this is how I just explained to them how the new euro was going to work, and explained exactly what's now happening, explained why that was going to happen. It was inevitable. Okay, back to the story. Okay, so now the British could hire people to come work at the coffee plantations because they needed the crown to pay the tax. Just like if my man is really at the door, I can hire you to work for my business cards because you need these cards to pay the tax. Now there's a very important thing here that Paolo already mentioned before. Why am I collecting taxes at the door? Is it to get the cards to be able to pay you? No. In fact, I have to spend these cards first before I can collect them. And I'm going to get to something in a minute, but if I wanted to borrow the cards from you, I can't borrow my own money from you until after I spend it. Okay. Now, if there are 300 people in this room, and how many cards am I going to spend if I offer you all a job? Okay, I'm probably going to spend at least 300 cards. If somebody in here is not going to be able to get out of the room. But what if one of you wants to work and earn 2 or 3 cards? Yeah, maybe you want to take them home or whatever. So then I would have to spend more than I tax. But could I ever possibly run a surplus where I collect more than I spend? Could I spend 100 and collect 200? No. And in fact, what would happen if, there are 300 people and I decided I'm only going to spend 250 cards. I'm only going to have jobs for 250. Okay, there are going to be at least 50 of you looking for jobs who can't get jobs. You're going to be unemployed and there's no way around it. Okay. Phil Harvey describes unemployment with a dogs and bones story. He says you put 95 bones in a room and then you send in 100 dogs to get bones. 5 dogs don't get any bones. Got that? Again, this is simple for central bankers now. And I really tell them the dogs and bones story. Okay, so 5 dogs don't get bones. And so what happens is the economists and the sociologists take those 5 dogs off to the side. And they have a special training course for those dogs. And they train them how to get bones. And they practice with them to make sure they're really good at getting bones. Then they run the experiment all over again. They send the 100 dogs in to get 95 bones. And those 5 dogs come back with bones this time. And they say, see, anyone can get a bone if you work hard and train hard and compete hard. Of course, 5 other dogs don't get bones, right? The unemployment is 5% of those dogs. They're not going to get bones. That's called a macro problem. What the solutions of training and everything else, those are micro. They call those micro. And when you have a macro problem, there's no way you can solve it at the micro level. The only way they're going to get rid of that problem is 5 more bones. And if your tax is 300 cards, and I only spend 250, there are going to be 50 people unemployed. And the only way we're going to get rid of unemployment is if I spend enough for you to pay the tax. Now, there are 2 things you can do with the cards, and this is true with money as well. You either use it to pay the tax, or you just hold on to it. And if you just hold on to it, we call that savings. Okay? And in our economy, there are a lot of reasons people hold on to it and save. For one thing, it keeps them in your pocket when you walk around. Those are euros that were spent and they haven't been taxed yet, or you wouldn't have them. So let's say you all wanted to walk around with one of these in your pocket, okay? And you were willing to work to get that extra one so you could walk around with it in your pocket. Now I'd have to spend 600 cards before no one was willing to work for them. I spend 600, my tax man only collects 300. Where did the other 300 go? Into your pockets. Savings. Okay? If I don't spend enough cards to cover your need to pay taxes and your desire to save, how do I know I haven't spent enough? I know because somebody's looking for a job to earn more. Unemployment is always the evidence that the government is not spending enough to cover the tax bill and the need to save. Let me say it another way.
Ve lo spiego in un altro modo.
If the government spending isn't enough to cover the tax bill and the desire to save, the evidence is unemployment. It's a simple point of logic. It's beyond dispute. There's 12.2% unemployment in Italy. Why? Only one reason. The government is not spending enough euro to cover the tax bill and the need to save, the desire to save. In which case, it has only two choices if it wants to make things right. It can either lower the taxes or increase the spending. In other words, make the deficit higher. Some combination of taxing less and spending more so that an important balance can be achieved. This is the important balance, the real balance, the economic balance. Spending has to be balanced against the need to pay taxes and the desire to save. That is, the real economy is in balance when the government's spending the right amount so that taxes can be paid and savings desires can be realized. How hard is this? They're doing it backwards. I'm not spending enough cards for you to pay the tax and to save, and you're up looking for a job that pays more cards. And if I'm the European Union, what do? I say, oh, I'm going to raise the tax and spend less. So what do? I raise the tax and cut spending, and unemployment goes up some more. It's like the carpenter with a piece of wood. And he says, you know, no matter how much I cut off, it's still too short. Or the hairdresser, the barber. No matter how much I cut, it's still too short. Okay? It would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. The whole civilization is being destroyed. You know, so let's say I'm running this rationally. I'm allowing you to earn whatever you need to pay the tax. And let's look at why I'm doing this. Why would I do this? Why would I tax you and then give you jobs to pay in my cards? Why would I do that? Because I want to get work done. I want the floor cleaned. I want the walls repainted. I do it because I want you to work for me. Okay? The government does it because it wants to be provisioned. The British wanted people to work on the coffee plantation. They didn't put a hut tax on just to go through some, mean exercise. They put a tax on so people would be unemployed and then work for the crown so they could grow the coffee. The European Union collectively wants to provision its governments. It wants soldiers and school teachers and all kinds of public service. So how does it get people to work for the government, to perform public service? It imposes a tax on the economy and something nobody has, with severe penalties if you don't pay that tax. That tax creates unemployment. It creates people looking to work for euro. And then the government hired people with their otherwise worthless euro.
Otherwise?
The euro that would otherwise, without the tax, would be worthless. But they unemploy a lot more people than they hire. What sense does that make? Why would I tax 300 and get everybody unemployed if I only want 100 of you to work? The tax creates a certain amount of unemployment, a certain amount of people looking for a certain amount of work to get the money to pay the tax and to save. And then the spending hires those people to get the government's work done. If you don't want that many people to work for the government, the tax is too high. It needs to be smaller. Or conversely, if you need all those people in government with the public services, go hire them. What they're doing defies all logic once you understand the system. So what are the MMT proposals for the European Union? Number one, they should explicitly guarantee the Italian debt. They've done it indirectly. That's not good enough. They've already proved the guarantee doesn't cause inflation or any other problem. Not that that shouldn't have been obvious from the beginning, but by making it explicit, the interest rates come right down to their policy rate. And more important, they need to immediately relax the deficit limits of 3%. That will make sure that government spending is enough to cover the taxes, the need to pay taxes and the desire to save. And every economist who's paid to be right will tell you that will bring the unemployment way down. Now, the last thing is very important. It's a powerful anti-inflation measure. It will make Italy less prone to inflation than anyone in the world. The ECB does it. They'll do it for the whole European Union, hopefully, but this proposal is just for Italy. So, by offering a transition job for anyone willing and able to work, the private sector doesn't like to hire people who are unemployed. They like to hire people already working. When the economy grows because of the deficit limits going up, Sales are going to go up, output's going to go up. The private sector is going to be looking for millions and millions of new people to hire. We want to make it as easy as possible for them to do that. They don't like to hire unemployed, so what do? We offer anyone willing and able to work a job that pays a fixed wage, and there they are, ready for the private sector to hire them away, which has been documented over and over again, and we have all the documentation that this absolutely works. And it ensures the availability of a job for anyone. And so we're proposing you do this like an ultimatum. Give the EU 30 days to relax the deficit limits and guarantee the debt. If they refuse, there are only two options to fix the economy and avoid the destruction of the civilization. One is tax credit spending, which goes beyond the scope of this meeting. And the other is to begin taxing and spending in lira. And we have a comprehensive plan for that, which guarantees full employment and unimaginable prosperity. And it's not about getting something for nothing. It's about working and producing output. And we are blessed today with no real shortages of resources. There's no shortage of food, clothing, and shelter. All of these real resources are in abundance. Italy is like an Olympic runner, and then the European Union puts a plastic bag over his head, suffocates it. We are saying remove the plastic bag. Remove these artificial restrictions. Stop artificially restricting your money so there isn't enough to pay taxes and save. So it's not about adding stimulus like they all talk about. It's about removing drag. So I'm going to skip over the tax credit part because it would take another half hour, 45 minutes. But this is the proposal for returning to the lira. To save time, I'll let you read it quickly. Also, you know, we can go over that later for people who are interested in the details. But we're not talking about repudiating debt or confiscating deposits or anything like that. And notice at the bottom, we have the same transition job to anyone willing and able to work. You might hear that called a buffer stock policy. And the point is, an employed buffer stock is far superior than a buffer stock of unemployed people. We talk about government is for public infrastructure, for public purpose. Much of it's been cut. I'm sure most people would like to see a lot of it restored. And when government's at the size where people want it to be, then taxes are adjusted so that the spending is enough to cover the tax and the net savings. The deficit's the right size, but no higher than that. Once you're at full employment, if you try and increase the deficit from there, all you do is push up prices. And I would think no more than 3% of the labor force would ever be in a transition job because the private sector is strong enough to hire people, will be more than strong enough to hire people away. Okay, we have a little warning here. If you leave the euro and go back to the lira, and you have leadership that believes in a balanced budget and running a surplus, you're going to be right back to where you started, like the UK and the United States. We have our own currency. We have no restrictions on what we can do. And yet the high unemployment is the evidence that the US and the UK don't spend enough to cover the tax bill and the savings desire. I've already given you the conclusion. I'll give it once more, okay? The tragedy of Europe is caused by leadership that believes the deficit is too large and must be brought down. And the solution is leadership that understands that unemployment is the evidence that the deficit is too small and needs to be made larger. Thank you very much.
Grazie.